Think about this for a second. The Federal Reserve raising rates after all of that liquidity was pumped into the system and the market crashed in reverse. The stock market and the housing market crashed in reverse. Unemployment plummeted. When these things happened, companies started paying employees significant amounts of money because the job market got so competitive. You ended up in a scenario where the Federal Reserve said, okay, we cannot look at inflation as transitory anymore. We have to raise rates in order to keep this from getting any further out of control. Without the Federal Reserve raising rates, real estate would have continued to increase double digits. The stock market would have continued to increase significantly double digits at an alarming rate if they didn't do what they did. Love it or hate it, Trump has been very vocal about his policies and his vision for America. He's been bending the political and economic landscape to his likeness to the best of his ability. One of his most emphatic promises has been to reignite a resurgence in lending in America. As you see on his January 29th Truth Social post, of many plans he emphasizes, one of which is to unleash lending to all Americans and America's businesses. You may be sitting here scratching your head trying to figure out, how does this link to me possibly being able to not retire? Well, stick with me for a minute. Before we dive into that, we need to start understanding the effect, if he's successful in this promise, that it's going to have on a broader marketplace and the economy as a whole, and how that's going to lead to the inability to being able to afford hardly any assets and many goods and services in the future. I'm JP from Blueprint for Prosperity Network. I am a licensed financial professional, a retail banker by trade, 10 plus years of experience, bringing you the information and knowledge you need to maximize your banking relationships and help you maximize your borrowing capacity so you can customize your own blueprint for prosperity. So to get into this in a little bit more context, what I want to do is read off verbatim the definition of a reverse market crash. You may have heard this term be thrown around a little bit on social media, here on YouTube. What I want to do is put some deeper context on how a reverse market crash comes to play, what incentivizes or creates reverse market crash, and how that can lead to a position, if you're not in position, to not be able to retire and to be living an extremely uncomfortable lifestyle if you're not careful and don't put your finances in proper perspective. So let's take a look into what this actually sounds like. A reverse market crash refers to a rapid and significant surge in asset prices, essentially the opposite of a traditional market crash where prices plummet. It occurs when market sentiment shifts dramatically towards extreme optimism, causing investors to buy aggressively, drives prices sharply upwards, often fueled by speculative buying, external factors like government intervention, or unexpected liquidity shifts. So key points about a real estate market crash: rapid price increases, which we've experienced post-COVID. Unlike a crash where prices fall quickly, a reverse crash sees a sudden and substantial rise in asset values. Excessive optimism. This phenomenon is often driven by extreme bullish sentiment amongst investors, leading to a frenzy of buying activity. Sounds familiar if you've been in the 2020s, right? Potential causes. Factors like unexpected government stimulus, low interest rates, or market manipulation can trigger a reverse crash. Example scenarios: central bank intervention. Sounds familiar. If a central bank injects large amounts of liquidity into the market to stimulate the economy, it could lead to a rapid increase of stock prices. Speculative bubble. A sudden surge in demand for a particular asset class, like cryptocurrency, can create a bubble where prices rapidly inflate due to speculation. So, as you've heard verbatim from the great Google gods, essentially a reverse market crash is where you have some external factor that influences asset valuations and creates blind levels of optimism in investors. This basically means you have a government that in some form or way intervenes into the market, or the Federal Reserve intervenes into the market. So in order to spur bank lending, as never seen before in America, as he emphasized, that basically means the Federal Reserve would have to do what? Pump liquidity into the market. That basically means lowering interest rates and facilitating the flood of liquidity into the banking system so banks can lend it out to Americans and American small businesses or businesses as a whole. When this happens, you end up having microcosms of bubbles popping up in asset classes. We experienced this in the earlier 2020s with real estate. The stock market also did extremely well, but real estate went insane. Residential real estate in particular. You had a scenario where it was hard to miss. When it came to valuations of homes, you had blind, no inspection, no contingency offers being made on homes, sight unseen, $20,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 over asking price in real estate because interest rates were dropped and liquidity was pumped into the system. The borrowing standard dropped. People were able to afford more real estate and they had more money in their pocket. This is the effect of a broad base of an injection of capital, aka a resurgence in lending. This is exactly what President Trump wants. He's going to rank his presidency and his legacy off of three of a handful of different factors, three big ones. The first is going to be unemployment rate being as low as possible. The next is going to be economic growth. The third is going to be increased valuation of the stock market. These three things of other things he's going to weigh in are going to be the biggest pillars in what he sees as a successful legacy and presidential campaign. His intent is going to be to get those three numbers in the best position in his vision possible. American banks lending into the system at levels not seen before, and especially not in the last 2 years, is how he plans on accomplishing that. Because the majority of economic activity that he is for, that will lead to massively lower unemployment, which is already historically low at the moment, which will also lead to significant gains in GDP or economic growth, which has been abnormally successful with compression of higher interest rates the last 2 years, and the overall expansion and growth of the stock market, company valuations, meaning that these companies will have to have more capital injected into their pockets, as well as their consumers or who they're providing their goods and services for, having more money in their pockets. That also includes tax cuts. So you see where this is going, deregulation. This is going to be a recipe for a massive reverse market crash. There have been few on YouTube who have been putting this out there as a PSA. Shout out to them doing so, because if they're giving the kind of context that I'm giving you, they are pretty much spot on. The recipe is there for there to be a massive spike in asset valuations, as well as by proxy, a massive spike in overall inflation. You have to keep in mind, after COVID struck us and the government did what it did fiscally and the Federal Reserve did what it did monetarily, we witnessed a massive surge in borrowing capacity, a massive surge in money in the system, a massive surge in money in people's pockets. When that happened, shortly thereafter, within a year, year and a half, 2 years after that happened, we had massive spikes in inflation, even the stated numbers of inflations. Many have made arguments, sensible arguments, that the numbers that are promoted to us for inflation are fluffed and massaged to not be as severe as what they really are. So if that's the case, and even under official numbers, inflation was significantly higher. In some categories, 10, 20+%. That basically means that when rates went up, that actually subsided the growth of inflation. It did nothing. It did absolutely nothing to stop the growth in prices. Think about this for a second. The Federal Reserve raising rates after all of that liquidity was pumped into the system and the market crashed in reverse. The stock market and the housing market crashed in reverse. Unemployment plummeted. When these things happened, companies started paying employees significant amounts of money because the job market got so competitive. You ended up in a scenario where the Federal Reserve said, okay, we cannot look at inflation as transitory anymore. We have to raise rates in order to keep this from getting any further out of control. Without the Federal Reserve raising rates, real estate would have continued to increase double digits. The stock market would have continued to increase significantly double digits at an alarming rate if they didn't do what they did. When they did put rates higher than they've been in over 20 years, you only had a mad suppression. You only had a certain level of suppression, rather, in real estate valuations in most markets, in the stock market. Even in 2024, the S&P 500 was still over 25% in growth. That's with interest rates as high as they've been in over 20 years. Real estate in the last 2 years with interest rates as high as they've been has still grown. That's even with residential real estate transactions plummeting the last 2 years. Even with all of the downward pressure of monetary policy changes, The Federal Reserve was not able to truly win their battle against inflation at the time of this recording. That just means slowing down the growth of prices. If interest rates are dropped again, which Trump, the Federal Reserve, and the banks all want, if liquidity is pumped back into the system again, via the Federal Reserve into the banking system, which again, Trump, the Federal Reserve, and banks all want, what do you think is going to happen? Now that this has been laid out for you, what do you think is going to happen? Everything of value and some things that aren't of value are going to go through the roof. People are going to have more money in their pockets. This is along the way with tax cuts and deregulation, by the way. Lending standards will change and become more fluid and loose, and you will have more people with more money potentially in their pocket. You will also have businesses being able to function on a level at a faster speed with less regulations. Your economy will likely heat up, and it will heat up very significantly. When this happens, real estate valuations, stock market, company valuations, assets like crypto, potentially gold and silver, goods and services, energy prices, all of these different things will inflate highly likely. It may not be all at one time. It may not be a massive predictable spike, but these factors have come together before, and we've seen significant shifts in the market very shortly thereafter. If President Trump is successful in getting rates down, getting money pumped into the system, getting banks deregulated and allowing them to lend more freely, along with tax cuts and everything else that he wants to accomplish, he wants more energy production. When these things come to roost, if he can get them to happen before his 4 years is up, any significant amount of it to happen before his 4 years is up, now hopefully you can understand why you being able to retire and being able to afford your lifestyle will become significantly unrealistic if you're not in the proper position. You will have to reestablish your relationship with your finances. You will have to drastically increase your income, and you will probably have to get very familiar and comfortable with strategically using leverage, aka debt, because you're not going to be able to rely on just using cash to stay afloat when it comes to your quality of life and it comes to growing your net worth. If you're going to try to save cash to buy your home, save cash to buy your car, if you're only going to rely on cash to fuel your business or your freelancing, you're going to be in trouble, because everything that this money that gets pumped in the system chases is going to inflate, and it's going to happen fast. It's already happened right before our eyes. If you weren't born yesterday, then you've lived through this exact liquidity injection, low interest rate environment, monetary and fiscal policy changes. You've lived through them already. You know what they're going to look like. So you have to take this as a PSA. This is a public service announcement and a warning that you have to get very serious about your finances, increasing your income, making sure your income is stable, and getting comfortable likely with using leverage. Now, if you make enough money where you just have so much excess surplus where you can effectively invest, afford your lifestyle, afford everything that the people are leaning on you need, and afford to invest effectively in the stock market, in real estate, and you can do it all off cash, God bless you. Do keep doing what you're doing. The vast majority of us, that is not the case. We will need to get comfortable and effective at using debt strategically. This is why I could never follow a Dave Ramsey, because the psychology and the economics that he pushes and the message that he pushes is around a totally different economic environment. I wish things were still that prudent. I wish that we can still be prudent with money and responsible with cash and have nice fluffy reserve accounts and never touch debt and be able to afford our quality of life, afford investments, afford assets, and be able to continue to function financially, not just now, but years down the line and for future generations. That is not the economic system that we are inheriting currently. We had a snippet of it from 2020, late 2020, 2021 to call it late 2022, early 2023. Of these economic and fiscal and monetary policies all coming to play at one time, and the reverse market crash was insane. The suppression of downward pressure from interest rate spikes was not enough to blunt the impacts of these changes. It wasn't enough. The Federal Reserve has still not, over 2 years of spiked interest rates, they still haven't gotten inflation down to the 2% target, which means everything would still be growing, just slower, and they still haven't accomplished that. They're looking to pivot. They're already done trying to fight the battle. They're holding right now because things are uncertain. But their goal is to pivot and get back to cutting interest rates get back to pumping money back into the system, and get back to unleashing lending in the financial system. When they get to that point, when these things come into place, asset valuations as well as the cost of goods and services or inflation or the purchasing power of your dollar, however you want to look at it, is going to change drastically. So I recommend that you take this as a warning, if you're not already alert and focused as possible, to make the changes you need to make to get ahead of the curve. Take your job seriously, increase your income best you can, enhance your skills. If you're in business, get serious about managing your business's finances and growing that business, growing your bottom line. Make sure you have solid retirement accounts. Use the 401k matches. Use employee stock purchase plans, pensions. Use IRAs. Make sure you're in the market. Own real estate, own land, own gold and silver. If you're comfortable with crypto, own crypto. You're going to have to get serious about getting beyond the norm, getting beyond the basics with finances, because the economic system we're inheriting is not going to allow those who function on basic capacity to survive. I want you to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, perceptions, and plans around what's likely going to be another significant reverse real estate market crash, reverse stock market crash, the rise and resurgence of inflation, etc. Let me know, do you see this playing out that way? If not, what do you see being the interruption or the obstruction to it? If you do see this playing out this way, this is a concern for you, and you see this on the horizon, comment down below and let us know what your plans are and how you plan to get around it and get through it financially in control of your life and not controlled by the system. Comment down below. To all my pioneers, welcome back. To my new viewers, welcome in. I want each of you to follow me on social media. I finally brought everything over to Instagram incrementally and growing the committee of my pioneers there. So you can find me on the handles you see on the screen and in the description personally and as the channel itself on Instagram. I want y'all to like, comment, share, subscribe. And also there's other ways for you to support the channel down below that have opened up finally. Thanks to y'all support and finding value in these videos. So continue to support the channel so this channel can continue to support and reinvest back into you. Other than that, I want each and every one of you to stay focused, stay in motion. I'll see y'all soon. This is my blueprint for financial empowerment and self-sufficiency. This is my blueprint for optimal health and body mastery. This is my blueprint for mental, physical, and spiritual momentum. This is my blueprint for prosperity.